welcome to this evening's event. My name is Flori. I'm one of the community and program managers for London National Park Cities Rangers program. And I wanted to say welcome to National Park City Week. If you haven't heard about us, Ross later on will tell you more about the movement. But basically, National Park City Week marks the second anniversary of the launch of the Universal Charter for National Park Cities, but also the launch of London National Park City. So during this week, the National Park City Foundation with World Urban Parks and Salzburg Global Seminar are also publishing technical guidance on how cities can become internationally recognized national park cities. So we're very excited about that. And most important, tomorrow is our second anniversary since London became the first national park city in the world. So we actually have a lot of amazing events happening this week, both online and face-to-face in London. So if you are in London, we would love you to join. Tomorrow at the same time, we're actually running an event called 25 Voices, where you will hear from rangers from across London on the different projects and activities they're working on. So if you would want some inspiration for anything on education, how to start your own garden, planting fruit trees, butterflies, and so much more, please tune in. I'll share the link on how to find all of these events shortly. We are also planning tree walks, yoga classes, dance classes. We're speaking at a few festivals. We have a few art exhibitions happening across London as well, a summer foray, an art drawing workshop, a workshop on how to start your own community garden as well. So a lot of amazing things happening, and they are all for free. So please join if you can. And just thank you so much for making the time today as well to join this session. If you're in London, we know it's very hot, and probably you would prefer to be somewhere in nature rather than in front of the computer. But the beauty of it is that we are connecting now with people from across London, but also across the world. So I guess we're thanking technology for giving us this opportunity. We have some brilliant talks coming up, so we hope you will enjoy them. They will be filled with provocations and ideas as well. And I guess before we get started, I just wanted to share a few pointers on the webinar and how the evening will proceed. So we have a few speakers joining us today. Each speaker will have approximately 10 minutes, and then there will be opportunities for Q&A. So please share whatever questions you might have. At the bottom of your screen, you will see the options for Q&A as well as chat. So please use the Q&A to type any questions you might have for specific speakers. But then feel free to use the chat section for any general comments or wider questions. We generally love to have interactions during our events and reactions and comments. So feel free to engage in that way. Also, please note that there is a difference between messaging all panelists and messaging panelists and attendees. So if you want to share with everyone joining today, make sure you press panelists and attendees. We're expecting about 300 people to join us today, so that's really exciting as well. Also, just so you know, we will try to answer to all your questions as much as we can, but if we have hundreds of them, we will try to follow up with some answers as well, and we will take the most popular ones. If you would like to share on social media any of the content we're sharing today, I'll share also the links in the chat, but basically you can tweet at London NPC. On Instagram, we are London National Park City. And basically the hashtags we will be using today is LNPC2. So hashtag LNPC2 and hashtag National Park City, and I will share that in the chat. So Today, Ross, who is one of our rangers, will be hosting the event. So I will pass it over to Ross to tell you more about London National Park City, about our Rangers program, as well as today's topic. So Ross, over to you.
Thank you very much, Florrie. Would you mind sharing my presentation, please?
Absolutely. Just give me a second.
No problem. So yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to the event. My name is Ross O'Kelly. I'm an urban designer, a podcaster, but more importantly, I'm also a London National Park City Ranger, and I'll get in a bit later as to what that is. I'll be taking you through just a quick introduction. I won't talk for very long. I just want to give you a bit of context for this event before we get into our wonderful speakers. Thank you very much. So really, London National Park City, it all started with one simple question. What if we treated London as if it was a national park? Next slide, please. After all, almost half of London's land area is devoted to green and blue spaces. This includes parks, gardens, green roofs, farms, sports pitches, canals, rivers, and lakes. And the city is also home to thousands of species of insects, birds, mammals, and amphibians. Through years and years of campaigning over the past maybe 7 or 8 years, as well as hosting events like these and having conversations, the popularity of this idea of a London National Park City grew until in 2019, the Mayor of London granted the city the status of the world's first national park city. And as Florrie said, this week we're celebrating our 2nd anniversary with a range of events. Next slide, please. So what is a national park city anyway? Next slide. We describe it as a place, a vision, and a movement. The place, of course, is Greater London. Next slide, please. The vision is to make the city greener, healthier, and wilder. And the movement involves all of us that live in the city and beyond. Next slide, please. We want to make more of the city green, of course, but we also want to connect more people to nature and the outdoors and the excellent green spaces that are already here in London. Next slide. Finally, we promote London's identity as a national park city to catalyze more positive environmental action. Next slide, please, Florrie. So to deliver on this mission, the idea of the London National Park City Rangers was born. Other national parks have rangers after all, so why not us? Next slide, please. Over the last 18 months, we have recruited 110 volunteer rangers from across London, which includes teachers, ecologists, urbanists, artists, musicians, parents, students, and many others from diverse backgrounds. The rangers help to deliver projects on the ground, inspire action, and spread their knowledge. You'll hear from a few of the rangers this evening to get a taste of what is happening across the city. Next slide, please. There are also loads of ways that you can get involved. You can join one of our gatherings, one of our events. You can volunteer. You can sign our charter on our website or persuade your business to support. You can also support our developer forum or schools forum or connect with one of your rangers near where you live or work. We're spread all across the city, so there's definitely a few living near you. And what's more, we're not just stopping at London. We want to see the National Park City movement spread around the globe. And there are now dozens of cities from Scotland to Australia who are building their own National Park City movements. But let's move on and we'll talk about the topic of today's presentation, which is urban greening for city resilience. Urban greening, it's the act of bringing natural elements into urban spaces. This could include planting trees, replacing concrete with parks, installing green roofs or green walls on buildings, creating allotments or urban farms, even letting your garden grow wild. There's so much you can do. The resilience aspect of this concept of city resilience, maybe deserves a slightly longer explanation. It's actually quite a simple concept, but it's also kind of an endless topic. Just think of it like this. Whatever city you're in now, maybe it's London, maybe it's somewhere else. Just think about over the last 12 months, what are the various shocks that have hit your city and that have threatened to disrupt our daily lives? A global pandemic, flooding, heat waves, storms. Now consider all of the ongoing stresses that a city has to deal with day to day. Things like poor air quality, traffic congestion, inequality. A city that is resilient is one that can absorb these shocks and stresses and continue to provide a good quality of life for residents. It's an important element of wider sustainability and climate action, especially as we move into a more uncertain future. As it turns out, urban greening, making our cities greener, healthier, and wilder, is one of the best ways to improve urban resilience. Having an abundance of natural surfaces and trees reduces the risk of natural disasters, and they're also vital for our health and well-being, just to name a few of the benefits. In fact, our first speaker, Niall, will get into a bit more detail on why these green elements are so important. So I won't labor the point, but I want to leave you with one thought, which is that a recent study came out that revealed that during the COVID pandemic, those of us who have a private garden or access to a public park nearby reported feeling better levels of mental health compared to those that did not have access to a green space. So the urban design of our neighborhoods has a huge impact on our personal resilience as well, our ability to deal with the shocks and stresses of life. We hope that the presentations this evening inform and inspire you about the potential for urban greening in your town or city, spark new partnerships, and arm you with the knowledge of how local greening projects fit into the wider picture of urban resilience and sustainability. Next slide, please, Florrie. I'm sorry to end on this really boring slide, but here's just a quick schedule of what to expect over the next 2 hours. We have 4 London National Park City Rangers, which are the ones with the green asterisk beside their name. And we also have 4 external experts that we've invited in to share their expertise. They'll all be giving short 10-minute presentations about their work. After the first 4 speakers, we'll go into a Q&A. Florrie's already mentioned about that. Please put it in the Q&A function of the chat. Then we'll have our next 4 speakers, and then finally a Q&A and a panel discussion. And we should hopefully be able to wrap it up by about 8 p.m. That being said, just a friendly word of warning to our speakers. Everyone has 10 minutes, so please try and stay within your 10-minute slot. If you go over it, I might have to hit the mute button. Just a word of warning, it's nothing personal. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'll introduce our first speaker now, which is Niall McEvoy. Niall is Business Development Manager at Scotscape, a leading green infrastructure and living wall provider. He's an educator and speaker with expertise in urban greening, horticulture, and the science behind how plants and trees can improve our cities. Please take it away, Niall.
Thank you very much, Ross. And I'm sure that over talking for 10 minutes was probably an aim at me. Florrie, could I get my first slide, please?
Sure, I'm having some technical difficulties, but it will be with you for 30 seconds, so I will let you entertain the public meanwhile.
Oh, well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thanks for all this pressure. Well, look, I'll do a quick introduction. As Ross said, my name's Niall. I work for a company called Scotscape, and whoever would have heard of us probably primarily known us as a living wall installer, but kind of in the broader strokes, we're a design consultancy for urban greening solutions across all elevations which we would find in the built environment. I must say, when Ross asked me to give me this presentation, I can certainly talk, and my usual presentation is probably and it was quite soul destroying to reduce everything down to 10 minutes. So, thanks, Ross. No slides yet. Someone's coming. So anyway, I'll entertain the crowd. As I said, I had to try and reduce a very large amount of information into a 10-minute slide. If there's any questions afterwards, please feel free to contact me and we can run through everything in detail as such. So Florrie, could you please move to the first slide, please? So what is green infrastructure? So I approached my good friend Google to see what it says. What is green infrastructure? So green infrastructure is the combination of science and nature to increase exposure of the natural environment, reduce exposure to physical or harmful substances and conditions, provides an opportunity for recreational and physical activity, promotes community identity, a sense of well-being, and provides economic effects for the community and the household. Google, that's absolutely fantastic. But the real question has to be asked. Why is it important? Then get the next slide, please. So of all our time on this planet, we've hinged around one very real fact, and that fact is called urbanization. Simply, our towns and cities will not get any smaller. And from town planners' point of view, it'll be a rarity to receive planning permission in the countryside. I grew up in the countryside, like many people have. And as we move into the future, that will become a rarity. We are trying to gather people into the built environment. Now, today, 50% of the world's population live in the built environment. They reckon in the next 29 years, by 2050, that's going to increase to 70%. Now, that's an incredible amount of people to have in one very small area. According to the World Health Organization, that equals 180,000 people per day will mobilize into the built environment. And of all our time on this planet, we have built 20 megacities. That is a city of plus 10 million people. They reckon in the next 30 years, we're going to produce another 20 megacities. So the rate at which we're going to grow is going to dwarf anything which has happened in the past. And London will become a megacity. According to the GLA, London will grow by 2 million people by 2050, and that will push us into a megacity. Now, when we look at the built environment, I'm sure there's many contradictions. Well, many people will contradict what I'm about to say, but in a nutshell, we build with concrete, steel, iron, timber, glass. Effectively, that's what we build our world around. But for me, it's great. It's great. It's great to live in these buildings, but it does very little for the environment as it stands. It does little for air pollution, little for biophilia, and little for biodiversity. So can I get the next slide, please? So as I said earlier, in my regular presentations, each one of these topics would have 10 to 15 minutes, and it's quite hard to boil everything down, certainly to boil down important facts and figures into a simple bullet point. But let's just talk a little bit about air pollution. 40,000 people is the average figure of people who die prematurely early in their lives in the UK with diseases related to air pollution. And nearly 10,000 of those will live in London. If you drive a car, the average car against the NHS over the lifetime of that car is £8,000. If you drive a diesel car, we're looking at £16,000 against the NHS. The average taxpayer, and when this survey was done, London and the UK was very much part of Europe, but the average taxpayer will spend £1,100 more per year in additional taxes due to poor air quality as opposed to clean air. And the lowest figure I could find was £17 billion negative against the UK economy due to poor air quality. Other people will have that pegged about 21 billion. So when we look at air pollution, there's very much two factors to consider. One is the health and well-being of the people who occupy those spaces. And then there's a huge financial effect, which will come back to haunt us in the economy. When we think about biophilia, it basically relates to us as a human, our relationship with nature and other living organisms. And as part of our nervous system, it's a built-in response to us. We call this the parasympathetic part of our nervous system. And when we expose people to nature, imageries of nature, walk in the park, walk in the forest, interior landscaping, it satisfies the parasympathetic part of your brain. And as a result, less of the stress hormone is being produced. So if you took that in a workplace environment, a place which looks more biophilic, if less stress is being produced through the people who inhabit those spaces, people are generally happier. And if you're happier, you're generally more productive and more creative within that job. If it's retail, there's papers written called the economics of biophilia, how much more people are willing to spend when an area becomes more biophilic. And these can all go hand in hand. When we start to think about urban greening, we can start to bring in these beneficial effects for biophilia. Biodiversity, this is the one which probably gets me fired up the most. We're going to play a little game. It's called You Have to Insert the Blank Word. And this, for me, defines biodiversity in a nutshell. There's an old phrase, you don't blank on your own doorstep. I think we can all fill in that word because that's it. This is our planet. We only have one. And it's up to us to make informed decisions of how we live on this planet and how it will affect us. We take bees. This picture is a solitary bee. A solitary bee will pollinate 60 to 70% of everything you've ever eaten in your entire life. And we don't pay them back very well. We remove their source of food. The UK has lost 98% of all wildflower meadows since 1930. And Germany has monitored 68 sites for the last 35 years, and they have a decline of 76% of all winged insects. And it's hugely unfortunate that, you know, if you take a nice drive in the countryside and we look out and we see the trees and the fields and the whatnot, that's not wild enough. That's agriculture, it's monoculture. We're breeding crops and using pesticides. So we have to really evaluate the landscape which surrounds us and how beneficial it can be. And finally, economics. I kind of lumped everything into the economic folder, because when we do green infrastructure right, we can challenge issues such as the heat island effect. We can thermally insulate a building to retain heat and equally to exclude heat on the warm days such as this. So air conditioning costs would be significantly lower. Again, if done correctly, we're talking sustainable drainage. We reduce the amount of water which can hit stormwater, again, to prevent flooding. And for any developers in the audience, they're going to become very versed on the urban greening factor and biodiversity net gain. So we don't really have the time to go into these in great detail today, but with the urban greening factor, developers are going to look for methods to install green infrastructure into any scheme because they require valuable points to allow for planning permission. And biodiversity net gain, in a nutshell, means that developers now must leave the site in at least 10% better off than once they found it in terms of biodiversity. Can we get the next slide, please? So when we think about the tools in our arsenal, and lots of people think about green infrastructure that says, okay, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be technical, it's not something we've done before. Forget those ideas. Green infrastructure, in its very basic form, it means choosing the correct plant, placing it in the correct location to carry out a specific task. Now, when it comes to air pollution, we now have science on our side. And we've got people like Dr. Ross Cameron at Sheffield University who's carrying out lots of studies about how plants can be hugely beneficial for sequestering air pollution. And I won't go into this in great detail, but if we look at the bottom cartoon character, we have a car, a hedge, and the person. And when greenery is installed correctly, and specifically this laurel hedge, large leaf with a waxy texture, when those plants are placed in the correct location, we can help protect people from issues such as air pollution. Can we get the next slide, please? But these are probably more familiar tools which you would recognize. We have our green roofs with sedum or a wildflower meadow, and maybe involve an ecologist, and they will be able to specify which is the correct type of planting for your specific area. I'm sure lots of people have seen living walls to this date. I'm with Scotscape 10 years, and over the last 10 years, living walls have absolutely transformed in their capabilities. Now it is possible to modify the pocket system within a living wall to incorporate small trees and large shrubs into a particular system. So it is true, if designed correctly, you could have a vertical forest in any built environment, and all of these plants can be used, selected specifically to be beneficial to the built environment. And in the middle, we have adapted living walls to wrap around lighting columns, which are solar-powered recirculating systems. These are going to be biodiversity corridors to have the best native and naturalized species, because we want to create green corridors across town to attract wildlife into the city centre. Next slide, please.
I'll just give you a 30-second warning there, Niall.
Okay, next slide, please. I want to leave you on this message, and do this tomorrow. Ask people, what is nature? And I guarantee you, people will talk about lions and tigers and fish and sharks and flowers and trees and whatnot. It will be rare that anyone will put their hand up and go, me, I am an element of nature. When our homes, our towns, our cities, our schools, our workplaces, our shops reflect what we are, that's when you could get a profound effect on the built environment. hopefully I'm in my 10 minutes. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you very much, Niall. That was brilliant. I'll just move us on to our next speaker, which is Tiago de Zoeten. Tiago is a conservation biologist at Mossy Earth, a social enterprise on a mission to restore nature and fight climate change. He has particular expertise in delivering rewilding projects across Europe and beyond. So if we can just get up Tiago's slides, and then I'll pass over to him.
So hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me. So as Ross just stated, I'm a conservation biologist at Mossy Earth. So my role is essentially to plan and implement rewilding projects. And at first, when I thought about giving this talk, I was thinking, how can I relate this to cities? Because we haven't actually implemented urban projects ourselves. But as I started thinking more about it, I realized that some of the expertise of what we do in these wild and faraway places can perhaps be quite interesting for what people are thinking about in restoring city ecosystems. So next slide, please. So what is rewilding? It's a bit of a buzzword right now, and perhaps to start with a very simple definition, we can just think of it as the process of moving landscapes from a state of being degraded and human impacted to becoming wild and biodiverse. This is quite broad and not everyone would agree with it. So I'll give you a more technical definition now. So next slide, please. So this is from a recent book by Paul Jobson and Ken Blythe, where they define rewilding as aiming to restore food webs, natural disturbances, and dispersal, and that the interactions between these ecological processes foster complex and self-organizing ecosystems. And so this is a focus on specific processes as opposed to species. And this is the way in which rewilding aims to let nature take its course and recover. But you might think, isn't this the same as conservation in general? And so I'll try and give you a bit of a perspective of what might be new about rewilding. Next slide, please. So to some extent, rewilding can be thought of as a movement that's calling for some changes in the way that conservation is done. So it's asking us to be more focused on ecological functions, so things such as predation, dispersal, rather than being focused on the numbers of individual species. It's also asking us to let nature take its course, so avoiding situations where we're having ongoing human management of the ecosystem to be in a particular state. And it's also asking us to be very wary of shifting baseline syndrome. So shifting baseline syndrome is the process by which our expectations of what pristine nature looks like keep getting lower and lower generation after generation, and which might result in conservation policies that are not sufficiently ambitious. So rewilding is asking us to be more innovative in this space. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting article published last year that was looking into this discussion, because there's a lot of academic debate, especially about what rewilding means from a scientific perspective and how it's different from ecological restoration. And so they make this interesting and perhaps a bold claim that the acceptance of novel ecosystems is the main and perhaps the only difference between rewilding and ecological restoration in general. And I just wanted to give you an example to illustrate what this means, this acceptance of novel ecosystems. So in the Mauritius Islands, there was once a giant tortoise species endemic to the area, which became extinct. And it performed a very important role in dispersing the seeds of this large-fruited ebony tree, and also in grazing the vegetation. And an ambitious project was started where different species of tortoise was introduced, which essentially played the same role as the one that was there before. And this was a huge success, helping to restore the seed dispersal for this tree. And this is quite unconventional regarding conservation, because it's using species that are not native to the area. So next slide, please. So you might be thinking, what does all this have to do with cities? And this is where I think it gets interesting, because cities are completely new ecosystems for many species. It's not necessary to go in details, but just the light intensity, chemical pollution, noise, hydrology, the types of food that are available, all of this changes very rapidly. And so the kinds of questions that we need to be asking in terms of how we go about restoring and managing biodiversity in urban areas are quite similar to the ones that people who are carrying out rewilding projects, such as the one I was describing with the tortoise, need to be thinking about. So what does a healthy ecosystem look like in a city? Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of an idea of what might be happening in different cities. So when we develop urban areas, some species simply leave, or they become extinct, or they migrate. Others are more well suited to the city already and actually do quite well. And then the ones that are perhaps most interesting are the ones that are adapting to live in the city. So this can include behavior change, such as great tits that change their songs to deal with the noise of the streets. But then also some species seem to be adapting by natural selection. So snails, for example, appear to be changing their coloration to deal with heat, and this is a genetic response, actually, in the Netherlands. So essentially, as with the case of rewilding, where we were asked to imagine what do we want our ecosystems to look like, the same happens with cities. And the first step, I believe, is to actually know what's there in the first place. And so that's where I think everyone listening and everyone who's a city dweller can play a role. And so this is something very exciting and a growing field, which is the field of citizen science. And this essentially is a way for people to record biodiversity in their local area and to share this to a global database that science can then use to extract useful insights that can then be used to determine what policies should be implemented. And iNaturalist is probably the biggest of these platforms, and I would highly recommend you check it out after this presentation. Next slide. So just to get people excited on citizen science and biodiversity in their local areas in cities, this is just an example of something that happened last summer, where a group of citizen scientists actually found a species that was entirely new to science. So this is a parasitic wasp that was first identified actually in a park in the middle of Amsterdam. So there's just so much to be discovered still, and this is something that everyone can be involved with. So I think it's quite exciting. Next slide, please. And finally, in terms of something that I thought was quite interesting when I thought about rewilding and what might already be happening in London, is this project that was started by BugLife International. It's called Beelines, and the goal is to essentially create pollinator highways across the country. And there's such a highway was identified as a priority area crossing London, actually. And I think this, even though when we think about rewilding, we might be thinking wolves and bison and large mammals, I think this is a great example of what rewilding in cities can look like. So in this case, the goal is to have these areas which are priorities for restoring habitat for pollinators, and then anyone can find a way to restore these. And it focuses on the component of dispersal and connectivity, which is central to rewilding, and also on having a functional view on what ecosystem restoration means. So in this case, pollination, of course, is critical. Next slide, please. So just to finish, I thought I'd finish with the 3 things that you can actually take from this talk, and that actions that you can take. So the first one would be to read that book I mentioned in the beginning, Rewilding, the Radical New Science of Ecological Recovery. And then just to think about how these concepts apply to cities. So these were my thoughts for someone who doesn't work in urban areas, but some of you will probably get a lot of inspiration from that. And then the other one is to download iNaturalist, the citizen science app, and start logging observations in your local area. this can be a lot of fun, and it's a great way to actually connect with nature as well. It helps you identify the species based on a photo and your location. So it's really quite exciting. And then finally, just check if there are any nearby beeline sites that you can visit, or that you can actually get involved in restoring those. So yeah, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiago. That was great. I also love that you gave our participants homework. Let's hope not everyone does that, or you'll have a really busy weekend coming up. Someone just mentioned in the chat, if people are interested in rewilding, to have a look at Knepp Wildland Estate in Sussex. And the other one that someone said was Stave Hill Ecology Park and Russia Dock Woodlands, which have had a lot of red list creatures, with more appearing every year. And that's in Southeast London. Our next speaker is Divya Hariramani. And I apologize, Divya, if I've mispronounced your name. You can correct me in a minute when you come on. Divya is a renewable energy engineer and a London National Park City Ranger. She is passionate about urban foraging and runs an Instagram page called Fruity Walks, where she documents London's fruit trees. Over to you, Divya.
Hey, Ross. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm so happy to be talking to you today as one of the London National Park City Southwark Rangers. And today I'm mixing my favorite things in the world, buildings, cities, and fruit trees, to be specific. As Ross was saying, my name is Divya, and I am now a senior sustainability design and health and wellbeing consultant, working here in London with building owners and developers to make their buildings environmentally sustainable, healthy, and integrate them better with the wider community. So in my job, climate risks and urban resilience is very high up on our responsibilities throughout all our projects. And greening the city is something that I'm very passionate about, and it is a necessity and a global responsibility of those in charge of our cities and building owners. As Neil explained so eloquently, I won't spend too much time here, but some of the many benefits of creating more green spaces are reducing heat island effects, increasing the resilience in floods, decreasing pollution, and increasing biodiversity life. But today I'm here to speak about my lovely side project, which is Fruity Walks. As Ross was saying, a page on Instagram I set up a year ago now, with the initial aim of finding and mapping fruit trees in London. It has evolved in many ways from the initial concept of finding fun trees. So just so that you can have an idea, there's avocado trees growing in London, there are pomegranate trees, there are lemon trees, grapefruit trees, and that's something that I will never stop being amused by. And actually the stories behind those trees are some of the most beautiful stories behind this Fruity Walks. But actually I want this to become something bigger. I don't want just to find fruit trees. And I'm hoping to make orchards more available, easier to find for all to enjoy them. So today, as an example, I wanted to show this project, which we tried to create for the Southwark Park consultation response. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this all came about because Southwark Park proposed to all of its residents to submit ideas. And I think the main point, honestly, of my talk is if you don't ask, you don't get. So if anybody has ideas, go and speak with your councillors, with friends of the park, and you can get a lot more things that you can imagine. So we did exactly that. We said, let's propose to make Southwark Park more fruity, add more things. So some of the main ideas that we proposed were labeling and mapping current fruit trees, and creating a more inviting orchard area. And I will explain a little bit more about those in the next slide, please. So one of the main things that I was completely baffled was I walked in Southwark Park. I mean, lockdown every single day, Southwark Park was the place that I got air, I got clarity, that exercise hour was life-saving. And I've spent so much time there, and I never knew that there was already fruit trees planted. It was only through an article that we found out. And so here's where everything began. Like, how can it be this difficult to find fruit trees? I'm obsessed with them and I didn't find them. So there has to be better ways that the park can identify that this area has fruit trees. So that was one of the main things, understanding where, if there are any fruit trees already, where they are. Next slide, please. So this was just a couple of examples. These are all fruit trees. Again, in the middle of winter, and when there's no actual fruit, it's impossible. So that's why it's so necessity for these trees to be labeled and for everybody to enjoy them. Next slide, please. So these are some of the ideas that we propose. So lots of other public parks, the Victoria Park, parks of Geraldine Mary Hamsworth Park, the Deptford Park, all of them have orchards, and they have them clearly labeled that you can go and see what kinds of fruit trees there are. And this is not something new, this is something that has been done. So why not do this also in Southwark? Next slide, please. Another thing that was very important is that, okay, you can have the map at the beginning of the park saying this is the orchard area, this is the fruit tree area. But once you get there, it's hard to identify them sometimes, So we would really want to have labels so that it's even easier, so that if more people can identify them, then more people can enjoy them, and more people can learn to connect that fruit doesn't grow in Tesco and Sainsbury's. It grows very, very slowly, and it takes a whole year for one fruit to be done. So these are some of the ideas that we had to put some labels, and even using some of the felled trees from London, circular economy, creating those labels out of this wood. Next slide, please. Another big point about this project was trying to create a more inviting area. So we took inspiration from Geraldine Mary Hamsworth Park and the Deptford Park to plant more trees. So we send a whole list of trees that would increase the biodiversity, reduce pollution, increase and attract more pollinators. And then we suggested ideas. There's already a Southwark Park trail, so why not have a fruit tree trail that could match up with that? And in order to do this, we wanted to partner with great organizations that know very well what they're doing. And also the intention would have been to have local people help us, local schools, people from the community to engage in the process of creating this new space. Next slide, please. So another thing that we thought was really important is inclusivity and making it more available for people to enjoy these areas. So creating additional seating around this fruit tree trail. And again, using wood from local trees, from local hands, people that make seats and benches. And next slide, please. Craftsmanship, that's the word. And finally, we said, okay, well, all of these ideas, here's a couple of interesting locations. Why don't we do it? So next slide, and that's the final one. So basically, what I wanted to highlight in this project is that we sent this to Southwark Park. We haven't got much response if this is going to happen or not, but if you don't ask, you don't get. And by doing that, and by starting to think about these things and what you want to see in your own community, a lot of other things will come through without you even realizing. After proposing this, we are actually, Sarah and I from Trees for Bermondsey, we're going to be creating a peace orchard in honor of Ada Salter in Bermondsey. She was the mayor of Bermondsey, and it's her 100th anniversary. So there's going to be a peace orchard that hopefully is going to take place and will include a lot of these things that I've just mentioned. We want to create a bigger orchard in St. James's Park. We are working with other lovely rangers, Leslie, hi, if you're watching, to create forest gardens and Miyawaki forests. So hopefully next year we will have another event like this, and I can tell you the benefits and all of the process of getting these orchards up and running. But yeah, this is the process up until now. And again, if you don't ask, you don't get. So anything that you think would benefit your area, your local community, go and speak, go and do it, because a lot of good things can come out of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Divya. That has really inspired me to go out and try and find some fruit trees in my local area, which I know there is something else that I see quite often is if there is fruit trees, often the fruit never gets collected and used. And so sometimes, I would love to see a bit more organization actually to make use of this free food that's being dropped in our cities. A couple of people in the chat have pointed out, have mentioned some other orchards that are around London. One of them is Stave Hill. Let's see, the other one is Mitcham Community Orchard and Garden, which was once a dumping ground and now has many varieties of local fruit trees. So there looks like there is a lot of these popping up around London, which is great to see. Our next speaker, which is our last speaker just before the Q&A, is Katie Mills. Katie is another one of our rangers. She's a forest school leader, a practitioner of Shinrin Yoku, and runs 2 nature connection social enterprises, promoting the links between nature, health, and happiness.
Thank you, Ross. I was just wondering, do you have the presentation for me? I sent it a bit late. Otherwise, I can share it on my screen.
I gave you sharing rights, Katie, so you can.
Ah, superb. Thank you. Oh, typically I put my screen at the wrong point. 1 second. Just use this.
We can see now.
Yeah, super. Right, here we go. Hello everyone, thank you to London National Park City for this wonderful event. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Katie Mills, I'm the Director of Forest and Family and a couple of other ventures, but I'm also a London National Park City Ranger, and I joined as part of the first tranche, and it's wonderful to have all these other fantastic new rangers joining us this year. So I'm going to be doing a talk covering 3 topics. So I'm probably going to give about 3 minutes to each one, which is of course an impossible task, but it's going to be fun and a bit quick fire. But I'm going to be talking about forest school, forest bathing, and something else called Stories by Moonlight, which is a campaign. Yes, I'll just fire on. So let me see. I can share. Here we go. So a little bit about me. As Ross said, I'm a nature connector. I'm also describe myself as a nature curator. So I like creating experiences in nature. I'm a forest school leader and also a forest bathing guide. And I'm a new campaigner as well. So I'll talk a bit more about that. But I work in the city, and I think that's what's really special about my outdoor practice and my nature connection work, is that it's based in London. It's based in a bustling, vibrant, but as we heard, a very green and very blue and nature-rich environment. So this is me often wheeling a trolley filled with all sorts of exciting things to engage people with nature with. And this is me in one of my local parks. But I started this work about 4 years ago, and actually it really grew out of me wanting to reconnect myself and my own family, my own children with nature, and going on a bit of a journey around that, and sort of soaking up so much information and becoming really fascinated by this field of nature connection and the sort of the theory behind it and the science behind it, and wanting to share really what I was learning and experiencing with other people. And that's where Forest and Family really originated from. So initially I was working with families in my local area, and it's sort of grown from there into various other things. But at the time, there were a few things that were really driving my own desire to reconnect with nature. And it was this sort of recognition of my own barriers to time and nature within the city. And they were, of course, around things like fear, access, time, and tech. I can't talk and dissect all of these, but these are some of the top barriers that we have, particularly in the city, living in our bustling, busy, modern city lives, with actually engaging with nature and for our own health and our own benefits. And I was struggling with all of those on various levels. But I was also coming into contact with some quite shocking stats. Some of these will be familiar to many of you, but I'd come across this this figure, which was that on average, children now spend less time outdoors than prison inmates. I mean, that's insane. It's actually less than an hour a day. The majority of children in the UK and probably most other developed countries as well. But also our roaming distances they've almost disappeared. By 90%, they've shrunk, so that children really don't have any freedom to roam anymore. And also this one really stuck with me. It still sticks with me now, and it's that 1 in 9 children have not set foot in a natural environment of any form for at least a year. That one needs to be cold, and that has really been one of the guiding sort of pieces of information that drives my work, along with people like David Attenborough and the things that he says about the importance of time in nature and the physical, mental, spiritual importance of spending time in nature. So again, that's really driving a lot of the practice that I do. And then coming across terms like nature deficit disorder, which was coined by the wonderful Richard Lerz, which really defines this kind of spiritual, physical, mental fallout of not being in nature. And you see it in cities, you see it in children, you see it in communities and whole societies. And we can't dwell on this, but there's a really nice idea around the child being this indicator species. The fact that our children are no longer outdoors in nature is a signal to us in terms of what's happening there within our own species. So, you know, thinking about access to green space has really been sort of fundamental to issues around forest bathing and forest school, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. I just thought I'd include this as well, which has come from a fairly recent study that says we need to spend at least 2 hours a week in nature to start to see the benefits of our health and well-being. So I just thought I'd do a plug for the University of Exeter. That's a brilliant piece of research that came out in 2019. But what is forest school? So, where to start with forest school? Forest school is a practice. It's an approach to engaging children and adults. It's not just early years children, which people often think about forest school as. Anybody with intentional time in nature for physical, spiritual, emotional development. The practice really started in Scandinavia. I mean, of course, forest school is something that we all know through our childhood, but the practice was actually really sort of pushed forward in Scandinavia with children in schools. And we adopted it in the 90s in the UK, having had a group of early educational, early years educators going out to Scandinavia and bringing the practice back to the UK. So it's been going for quite a few years now, but it's this long-term process. It's not about spending a one-off time in nature. It's about spending repeated visits in a natural environment and really focusing on the learner. So very much child or learner-centered approach to learning about flora and fauna, engaging in the natural world. It's very much about boosting independence, resilience, confidence, communication. It's about taking children out in all weathers, all seasons. It's run by, forest school should be run by a qualified forest school practitioner as well. So there's very much a framework and a sort of set of principles that guide it. And of course, you see forest schools all over the world now, and they're cropping up in schools, they crop up in parks like the ones that I run, and they're taking place in little scrubby bits of land in all sorts of cities around the world. And what's really fascinating about forest school, I think, is that wherever it's practiced, it takes on its own flavour, depending on the environment, the culture that it's operating in. And I think that's one of the beauties of forest school, is that it can be many different things depending on the setting it's delivered in. So there might be some questions about forest school that I can talk a bit more about. I'm going to move on quickly to what forest bathing is. So forest bathing, also known as Shinrin Yoku, is age-old, again, just like forest school. But the practice that we talk about Shinrin Yoku, originated in Japan in the 1980s, where it was actually pushed out through the Japanese government as a response to the physical and mental fallout that they were seeing from people, large numbers of Japanese people moving from rural environments to urban environments. And they started experimenting by taking people out back into the forest and really encouraging this intentional therapeutic time in natural spaces, but particularly with trees. So with forest bathing, trees is quite key. And the practice has become a movement. It's now practiced all over the world. It's starting to take off in the UK. In many ways, forest bathing teaches us what we innately know about nature, which is that it's good for us. It depends where you practice forest bathing and the setting that you do it in, but typically it's a very slow, mindful, intentional walking experience where you will set out time for activities, or what we call invitations in nature, which are very simple but are a very deep way of connecting us through all of our senses with that natural environment. It is a very powerful and transformative practice, and many studies now have shown that it has huge benefits for health and well-being, everything from reducing blood pressure to addressing issues around anxiety and stress, improving mood, improving our sleep and our energy. So it's a wonderful practice, and if you haven't heard of it, I suggest you go and read about it. I'm going to move quickly on though, because I haven't got too much time, to talk a little bit about Stories by Moonlight. So Stories by Moonlight is a campaign that started about a year ago, but obviously it's been disrupted by COVID. And it grew out of what I was seeing through my work in London, this challenge around getting families, particularly children, and families and adults, to engage with natural spaces, and this issue around time, not having enough time to do that. So Stories by Moonlight is now a campaign which we are launching this year actually, and it's about taking bedtime stories outdoors. It's reflecting on the fact that we've lost our tradition of outdoor storytelling. It's almost, it used to define our worldview. It used to be part of everybody's lives. And that's kind of slipped away in the same way as our relationship with nature has started to slip away. But the good news is there is one place, a secret place, where nature is still very rich in children's lives, and they still come into contact with animals and trees and outdoor time and the freedom to roam and outdoor adventure. And it's actually bedtime stories, which is something that most children hopefully get an experience of and have a relationship with their parents through as well. So we're playing on that idea of taking bedtime stories outside, stretching the waking hours a little bit longer, encouraging families to take their bedtime stories outdoors, under a tree, into a back garden, onto a balcony, into a little public park, and to do that over the summer, and to do it as a collective movement so that we're all sharing that experience together. It works very well during the COVID pandemic as well, because you don't have to cram everyone together. It's very much about you setting out a set of resources that people can use to facilitate their own Stories by Moonlight experience. And if anybody is listening and likes the idea of Stories by Moonlight campaign, we are desperate for other people to get involved and to build a little bit of a team that can help deliver and grow this campaign. So thankfully London National Park City are behind the campaign as well, which is really exciting. They've got a number of rangers that are interested in supporting it as well. So yeah, so if you want to find out a bit more about what Stories by Moonlight is, one of our mottos is it's time to change the bedtime story. So we've got a bit more information on our webpage that we've set up for that. But we've also got a set of resources that you can download from the webpage, which is storiesbymoonlight.org. It's a guide for families, a guide for support partners, and we've also got a flyer and some social media templates as well. So we're using those over the next few weeks to try and get more and more families to engage in this outdoor campaign, which I think in many ways kind of ticks, it cuts across what many of the other speakers have been saying, which is that time outside is so precious when you live in the cities. And if there's any way that we can build more into it, build more time into our sort of daily lives and sort of think a bit more creatively about how we do that, and also make it part of a kind of new tradition as well. I'm really interested in how we build new traditions and the potential of those traditions as a kind of collective movement to push other agendas. Stories by Moonlight very much was fueled by this tension that I was feeling between doing small-scale, local nature connection initiatives, but being very aware of a wider, growing climate crisis, but also these rising barriers to outdoor time. And it's initiatives like, having a London National Park City and pulling together all these people that are, ideating and creating new collaborations and projects that I think collectively is where you can start to feel you're having a bigger impact. And for me, certainly, it's sort of how do you elevate your impact when you're normally just working on your own after these kind of initiatives. So I don't know if I've got much more time, Ross, because I haven't actually got a clock, which is why I'm rushing.
I'll have to ask you to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Okay, perfect. So I think that's it. More time in nature is brilliant for our bodies, our minds, our souls. Spend some time with trees. I'd love to talk to you a bit more about biophilia, which has already been talked about, but also I'll leave you with this. trees, obviously they live for a very long time, and they release something called phytoncides, which are essential oils, which protect themselves from fungi and viruses and bacteria. And one of the things that we've learned through the studies around forest bathing is that when the human body breathes in phytoncides, it has exactly the same impact on our human body on a cellular level. It boosts our immune systems. It boosts something called our natural killer cells, which help us fight disease and tumours and illness. So I'll leave you with that thought. More time with trees is really important. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. So much in there. And I'm just so glad to hear there's people like you working with kids in cities to bring them closer to nature. Absolutely essential. I'm going to bring us into our Q&A now. So if anyone has any burning questions for our panelists, please post it in the question and answer chat. And I have a few here that I will start with. So let's see who to start with. I will start with one for Divya. And perhaps also one of the other panelists has an answer for this as well, which is, do you know of any studies that show evidence of increased biodiversity in orchards?
Yes, definitely. I don't have it in the top of my mind, but the Orchard Project has incredible resources and studies and articles and so on that they literally explain exactly that. So I can have a look and post it on the chat actually. But
yeah, please do.
definitely.
Excellent. Yeah, that would be great. Another resource. One for Kate, Katie. Somebody says, I'm also interested in working in the nature well-being sector. Where did you train as a forest bathing practitioner? Are there any recognized qualifications? And if so, any recommendations?
Yes, so as a forest bathing practitioner, there's a few courses cropping up now. Mine was down in Devon, just outside of the, it was sort of around the, the Schumacher College, and the name, Forest and Ecotherapy, but I'll have a look before, I'll put it into the chat where I did my training. But I have a couple of friends who have also set, so that was you had to attend for that training and it's a diploma course. But I have a few friends that have set up during lockdown some online courses, and some of those are fantastic and more affordable and not as intensive as well. So there's a plethora of options, and actually we hope to be launching one soon, but it's not ready, so I can't share that one with you. But I'll certainly share the one that I did, and a couple of my friends in the chat have it there, and I would recommend it.
Brilliant. Some people are asking if they'll be able to watch the recording after the event. Yeah, we are recording it and we'll be able to send you a link to it. It'll be up online so you can go back over if you've missed anything. Slightly technical question here for Niall, which I'm sure he can tackle, which is somebody says that in planning, many tall buildings above 18 meters in height have had green walls or some form of green facade approved in order to increase biodiversity and greening. However, fire safety requirements under building regs for buildings above 18 meters now restrict any greening to facades, including balconies and planters. And do you know, is there any way that you can remedy this?
Right, so what that person's relating is to, it's a private residence. If the private residence building, so say a block of flats, if that building exceeds 18 meters, not a living wall has to be 18 meters tall, but the building itself exceeds 18 meters, all materials on the facade must be A1 or A2 fire rated. Now, when it comes to living walls and planting, you could, for argument's sake, make a living wall system out of stainless steel. Perfect, it doesn't burn. But plants have a calorific value, and plants which have a calorific value over 3,000 kilojoules, under the perfect set of circumstances, potentially can burn. Plants which do not have 3,000 kilojoules will be succulents and sedum and whatnot, which we wouldn't normally grow in the UK. So is there a way around it? No, there isn't a way around it. They are the fire regulations, that anything on a private residence, not private residence, a residential tower block, that building exceeds 18 meters, living walls will be excluded from the facade of that building. And there's nothing you can do about it. Commercial buildings, we're still okay to go up and green above. Hotels currently still okay, hostels still okay, but I think hostels and hotels will fall into that same remit as a residential block. So that's just the way it is.
That's just the it's just the way it is. I think local authorities' building regs have become much more careful since Grenfell, of course. And so anything that they're not absolutely sure about is basically not being allowed. So hopefully in time they'll start to figure out which products are manufactured to be fire retardant, etc. And maybe
we have over last year developed a whole series of sensors to be included in our living wall. Two of those sensors, one measures soil moisture and it will irrigate the living wall when absolutely necessary. The other one is a heat sensor. Heat sensors will detect excessive heat, i.e. a fire in a building. That will speak to our irrigation system. It'll come up and flood the living wall. So we're not looking to change the fire rating, but we're there to prove that with technology, we can make all of these installations much more safer than they previously were.
Okay, very interesting. I've got a question here for Tiago. Someone asks, how can we reconcile rewilding with non-native plant species?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult question, to be honest. Non-native or invasive species are hard to manage in natural areas, and cities are no exception, especially with how prevalent they are. One thing that I think is interesting is trying to understand ways in which we can alter the ecosystem so that they can be more diverse. So if there are different ways of one topic that's interesting in terms of research is biocontrol agents. So for example, certain insects that feed on certain plant species, and whether there's potential to introduce species like that to change the community of plants in a city. I think that's very interesting, but in terms of applied ways of dealing with invasives in the city, I wouldn't really be the person to provide hard recommendations, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is a difficult question. I'm sure it depends on the situation and everything. Let's see. I'll probably have time for one more quick question. Somebody asks, any National Park City representatives for Johannesburg that I can contact? Hopefully Florrie or Ed, you can pick up on that. I don't know if you have any contacts there, but hopefully you can respond to that if that's the case. Okay. Let's see. I'll go for one more question here, which is more of a practical question about orchards, which is orchards are a great idea. Where does the funding come from? So any advice on that would probably be very helpful.
Yeah, the funding comes from many different places. It's something that I myself am getting to grips with this. There is quite a lot of bodies and greener, safer, something else from London. Leslie from London National Park City Ranger, she is incredible and she's helping us quite a lot when it comes to understanding where the funding can come from, and depending on your locality, depending on what borough you live with, there's also local boroughs that have different money allocated to trees and greening and harvesting projects. So it's quite an intense question because it varies very much. But yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around it. There's a lot of funding, which is good. You just have to talk to a lot of people and get your way through it.
I think often the experience with any kind of urban greening project is that actually there's quite a lot of funding out there. The difficult part is finding the land and getting the permission actually to do it. Okay, I will move us on to our next speaker. Thank you everyone for the great questions. Keep sending them through. We'll have another Q&A at the end. Our next speaker is Adib Dada. Adib is an architect and urban forester based in Beirut, Lebanon. He's the founder of the Other Dada regenerative consulting and architecture firm, and he has planted 2 Miyawaki urban forests in Beirut. And so I'll pass over to Adib. If you can share your screen. Any problems, let us know.
Thank you, Ross. Okay, I'm going to start off with a quick short video, and then I'll move on to the presentation. Sorry, just a second. Share screen, share sound. So I'm a forest maker from Lebanon. I'm going to show you just a glimpse of one of our projects.
good taste. Super sweet. This is the kharouf. Do you want to taste some?
Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the presentation very quickly. Okay, so the project you just saw is part of an initiative called The Other Forest, a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration in cities. At this moment, cities are not serving us well, as we've heard from all the other panelists. But comparing to London, Beirut city has less than 1 square meter of green space per person. So this is well below the, the recommended average recommended by the World Health Organization, which is of 9 square meters of green space per person. Cities are facing environmental degradation, alarming pollution rates, urban heat island effects, air and water pollution. So in our case, again, in Lebanon, we have the highest rate of premature death across the whole of Middle East and North Africa region. So the idea is simple. What if our cities were as effective and generous as a forest, providing not only for ourselves as humans, but for other species in perfect balance with the operating conditions of Earth? So the benefits of urban forests are, fighting climate change, filtering air pollution, cooling down cities, protecting biodiversity, birds and animals, managing urban floods by restoring the water cycle, improving physical and mental health. They also provide a competitive advantage for development projects, and they are cost-effective with no water or maintenance required after 3 years' time. They're in perfect alignment with the UN SDG goals number 6, on clean water, 11 sustainable cities, 13 climate action, and 15 life on land. The methodology that we use is the Miyawaki method of afforestation, developed by Dr. Akira Miyawaki in Japan in the 70s. And it's been internationally recognized by Project Drawdown as afforestation using the Miyawaki method being the #1 solution for cities to mitigate climate change. The World Economic Forum refers to it as tiny urban forests, which are a secret weapon against climate change. And the mayor of Paris announced the planting of 170,000 trees across Paris using the Miyawaki method. So to compare Miyawaki versus conventional landscaping. So Miyawaki forests are 10 times faster growing. They are 30 times denser, which means they can sequester 30 times more CO2 and more pollution. They are 100% organic. They don't need any pesticides or chemical fertilizers. They are very biodiverse. The forests we are planting have more than 25 native species. They require half the investment, and they become water and maintenance free within 3 years' time. So we planted the very first native urban forest in Lebanon, Beirut's riverless forest. So this is our site. At the top, you can see the canalized Beirut River, where only sewage runs for most of the year. And this is us planting the second phase of our project. So this site is 500 square meters, and it has 2,000 trees and shrubs in there. So these are some of the selection, some which you might know, like bay, laurel, hawthorn, sage, pines, and oaks. And this is the forest on the day of planting. As you can see, the saplings are about 1 year old, so they're really quite tiny. This is just 5 months later. And this is the forest at 2 years old. So this picture was taken last month. So after the summer, the forest will have become completely self-sufficient, and we will stop maintaining it, and we'll stop watering it. This is one of our other projects, Power Plant Forest, situated in the most polluted city in Lebanon, because there's a dirty power plant operating there. So the residents have the highest rates of cardiovascular diseases and lung cancer. So we used this strip, kind of like triangular road median, and planted it with 720 trees and shrubs. This is a forest up in a ski resort. So here we have about 800 trees and shrubs in this location. So just to show that it can also work in many different conditions. And finally, our last project we just planted is part of rehabilitating school playgrounds that have been devastated by the Beirut explosion last year. And so there's an initiative that started rehabilitating the playgrounds, and we removed the concrete and inserted the circular tiny forest with about 50 trees and shrubs in there. So up to now, we have 10 forests and counting, more than 1,260 square meters reclaimed, 5,200 trees and shrubs of 26 different native species planted throughout Lebanon. So the Other Forest is a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration in cities. We believe that by implementing urban afforestation, we can regenerate degraded leftover lands into a shared space between humans and native fauna and flora, tackle urban flooding, reduce pollution and urban heat island effect. Essentially, we'd be working with nature to transition our cities to healthy and resilient communities. So reclaiming degraded land as public space. So these could be road medians, roundabouts, planters in sidewalks, regenerating ecological system by nurturing the degraded urban soil, bringing it back to life, recreating its healthy microbial and fungal communities. We bring the native ecosystems back to life. And finally, regenerating social connections. By making a native forest, we can involve corporate teams, families, kids, and the community at large. Reconnecting with nature through positive actions focus on learning and bonding. So we have the opportunity to tackle climate crisis and bring people back to nature. We'd love for you to engage with us on social media, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Adib. That was really, really great. Wonderful to get that perspective from somewhere outside of London. And for people who aren't aware, there are a couple of Miyawaki forests recently planted or being planted in London, one of which is called the Forest of Thanks, which is in Barking and Dagenham in East London. There's also a lot of more mature forests. You can see examples online in places like Japan and India. And they're once they, after about 10 years, they come a bit more into leaf. They're really, really stunning and beautiful. So very excited about those projects. Our next speaker is Rose Cowling. Rose is a London National Park City Ranger, a community gardener and organizer who believes in a more resilient food future where London is abundant with food grown by the community. I'll pass over to you now.
Hello. Adib, that was so inspiring. I'm in awe of that, of your work. Oh, is someone going to move my slides on? That's fine. So I'm Rose. I'm going to be talking about setting up Denmark Hill Community Garden, which is an open allotment with no barriers. Next slide, please. So I set up the project back in 2018, initially with money from the Cleaner, Greener, Safer scheme through Southwark Council. Initially, this was just to build a couple of raised beds, and it was slow to take off for reasons I'll get to. I won't go into how it was getting that funding because that could be a whole talk in itself. So fast forward to March 2020 last year, it was the height of the pandemic, and the beds were empty. And through the mutual aid movement that cropped up from COVID, I started to talk to my neighbours, and I found a few people that were quite keen to start using the beds that we had, which were just, they had no plants in them, they were just kind of a playground for foxes. Next slide. So since last year, it's really exploded with growth and activity, and we've strongly established our ethos, which is no barriers to growing. So we're an open allotment, which means there's literally no gates, there's no waiting list. Anyone who lives on the estate is welcome to come and plant anything they want, harvest. respectfully from the cut and come again crops that we have. Next slide. Some of the challenges of setting up this kind of project. So it's really chaotic, which means that it can be a mess. It's pretty shambolic, which I don't mind, but maybe isn't to everyone's taste. And because we didn't have any money until very recently, we make do with what we can get, and that's mostly me getting stuff donated and making stuff out of the bins. Like, we have a great resource. I call it my favourite shop because it's right near the bins and people throw away some incredible stuff. We've got a cold frame made out of a pet cage, which works really well. Another challenge is that there's no planning to what we grow currently. So, you know, we've got too many brassicas in the beds, and we've got tomatoes where there was probably blight last year, but it's currently far more important to me that we just allow people the freedom and flexibility to try stuff and get things wrong, and we'll figure out things like planning what we're going to grow next year when we get more established, and getting it up and going was also a challenge. So as I mentioned, I set it up in 2018, and then they kind of languished for about 18 months because I had to move away from the estate, and unfortunately this project that I just designed and got funding for, I wasn't able to be involved, and I hadn't really done the outreach early to tell people there was going to be this space for them to grow. So it just kind of languished. It got some negative feedback. I got really downhearted, and it was actually COVID and starting to talk to my neighbours that really just changed things. Next slide, please. So until very recently, we had no money, which means it's quite hard to make things look neat and attractive. So it did mean that I had to work extra hard to find the resources, and that always meant making things out of waste. So our compost bays, our pallets, which I dragged from the street, and they work really well. They've stayed like that until we get someone to build them properly. They've done the job. We make our own soil. I spent that long lockdown winter, last winter, turning the compost pile every other day because I had nothing else to do, and it was worth the effort because now we have enough organic matter to feed all our beds for free. Next slide, please. So this is our new bathtub beds, filled with corn, squash, no, not corn, callaloo, squash, courgettes, cucumbers. So these probably would have ended up in landfill. They were donated / dumped. I think they were donated. And we just propped them up with breeze blocks that we found dumped in an alley, and I think they look really cool. Next slide, please. So some of the positives. While it is very chaotic, it means that it's flexible. There's no bureaucracy. People are free to do what they can when they can. And we have different people with different skills and interests. So Matilda and I waving in the middle there are the gardeners. Miranda on the far left is really good at things like logistics and money, getting us money. And Josh in the hat is our fellow ranger. I don't know if you're here. Hello. Is our compost bin hero. Next slide, please. So yeah, we have people with varying sort of interests and skills, and people that don't necessarily grow here are keen to make things happen for the community. So this is our build day where we set up the bathtub beds to plant all our cucumbers and squash. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's just us building it. Next one. So positives for me personally, I mean, I met loads of lovely people at a time when I was really sad and isolated and couldn't see my friends and family. And now every day I'm out in the garden and I chat to someone, and someone stops all the time to ask me what's going on, and I tell them about the ethos of the garden, or just to say, oh, I've got some pots, do you need pots? Or I've got too much worm tea, do you need worm tea? And I always say yes, we need everything. And as I was preparing these slides earlier today, I was sitting in the garden and someone walked past and went, wow, this is a nice little spot, isn't it? Which, you know, is really nice. We've created a place where people want to stop and spend time. Previously, this was just a cut through or somewhere where people took their dogs to go to the toilet. One of my favourite memories is Christmas Day last year. When I came back from my walk, there was a group of friends sitting in the garden drinking Prosecco because they couldn't meet anywhere else. And, you know, it was somewhere where they could meet. So that made me really happy. And it's taught me a lot about how to do community outreach, how to engage people. And the main thing I've learned is just if you want to do something, just do it. Yeah, I shouldn't have focused on the negative feedback because it was very, very minimal, and actually there was far more positive feedback. And definitely now that it's established, people are, you know, it's really, people tell us that they really appreciate it. So just do it. And as soon as you do something like that then has a visible impact, you'll find those people that are just really, really keen to get involved in a project like that. Next slide, please. So since the first couple of difficult years, it's now really established, and people are taking ownership of it. This is Matilda digging one of our new beds for us to plant our sunflowers. And as we were doing it, someone asked us if we were allowed to do it. And Matilda said, what? In Africa, we just plant in the ground. So we don't ask permission to do stuff if we think that it's going to improve our garden and make it better for everyone. We just do it. And so far, we haven't had to seek forgiveness for anything. And we've had really positive feedback from residents. We've had positive feedback from council workers, and the Residents Association are really happy with what we've done. Next slide, please. This is just to show you how tall our sunflowers are now that we planted in the ground. They haven't been in the ground very long, maybe 6 weeks, and they're now 7 foot tall. And I put them in there because I learned that sunflowers are phytoremediators, and yeah, they're just improving our soil. Next slide, please. So the most important thing for me is that we are literally feeding the community, which, you know, is a radical act in itself. Sorry, I'm just looking for a slide that I think might be missed. And people are asking us to grow stuff that they, you know, stuff from their home countries, which means that we can grow stuff which, you know, important cultural food for people without the carbon footprint. And this project for me really is a decolonising project, because we're providing an alternative way for people to get food locally. You know, one thing that I definitely learned, or definitely reflected on during COVID, is how easily you know, easily like broken our food system is. You know, it was really difficult to get stuff in the supermarket, and that happened really fast. So if we can provide people with the opportunity to grow stuff themselves, I really do think that's a decolonising act, because one thing that I think is important is changing the way that we think about access to land. This is land, you know, this is on our council estate. You know, this is land that we can utilise to grow stuff for our community and share, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So
just give you another 30 seconds there, Rose.
Yep. So final slide. So my ambition for the space is for it to become one where we can hold more workshops. I'm running a workshop on Sunday with fellow Ranger Mary about how to set up a community garden and introduction to our garden. We've got a build day on the 21st of August where we're spending money that we got from Q to build new raised beds. And if you want to get in touch with us, our handle on Instagram is Denmark Hill Garden. So yeah, please come and check us out and see what we're going to be doing. Thank you.
Awesome, Rose. Thank you for that. It was really, really inspiring.
Thanks.
I'm going to move us on because I don't want us to get too far over time. Move us on to our next speaker, which is Luke Newcomb. Luke is an LNPC ranger, professional gardener, and through his community interest company Grow N22, he has worked with local communities to deliver urban greening projects in Haringey, North London. Take it away, Luke.
Thank you, Ross. I love that bath planter. That is so cool. Thanks for showing that, Rose. My name's Luke Newcomb. I'm the founder of Grow N22, a resident partner in the Knoll Park Big Local, an active resident in my local community, and a professional gardener. I keep myself very, very busy. My partner tends to think that I've got ants in my pants, which is suitable for what I'm up to. The beautiful thing about Grow N22, it was developed during an NPC meeting, a campaign meeting, a good few years ago, and it's just grown from there. So we've put together a little video for you to watch, which is going to play in a few minutes. But with Grow N22, it's one of the only organisations in the UK that has a team that are primarily rangers, and we've been able to accomplish quite a lot in Haringey. You could, I guess, describe it as a concrete jungle. It has got its green spaces, but it actually needs a lot more. It's a heavy polluted borough, especially on Wood Green High Road. And if Florrie can please play the video. Welcome to Westbury Banks Nature Reserve, a nature reserve in the middle of Knoll Park, a Knoll Park Big Local initiative that's managed by Grow N22. Here we have the wildlife pond, lots of watermint coming up and some other plants. There's about 46 different species of native plant species in the nature reserve, and we've been running this site for the last 4.5 years. When we first came in here, there was a lot of overgrowth, and we've cleared that. Where the pond is, we took the remains of a vehicle out of there, the suspension, and where our rockery is, this was the remains of a kitchen and bathroom. So we're really into upcycling, reclaiming, and reusing as much as possible. There's some elements that you have to buy in, like for example the membrane. And you'll notice right behind me, we've got the Kabir bird hide, named after Ranger Kabir. So soon, over the next couple of months or so, we're going to redevelop the bird hide, make it a much bigger one. And just down here, we're going to create an eco hub. And now I'll take you on a little tour of the nature reserve. With the nature reserve, we always want to encourage people to learn and provide a bit of education. So one of the cool things that we have down at the nature reserve are magpies. And with this foliage, it's a very small flower here. I believe it's an alkanet. And if you can put it underneath the mag post, you can see the flower magnified. So a little fun fact for you at the Westbury Banks Nature Reserve, the plaques that you can see here, so the one for the fat hen has the English common name, the Latin name, and the Westbury Banks Nature Reserve social media handle. The cool thing about this is that if you go down to Kew Gardens or even the Eden Project, they're exactly the same plaque, although Kew Gardens and the Eden Project have IDs on their plaques. So nice little fact there. So over at our current storage unit, this one is going to be replaced in the next couple of months because unfortunately we've had a few break-ins where people have broken into it and stolen some of our tools and other materials. But one of the unique ways that we harvest rainwater is that we put a guttering just on the roof of the storage unit. And when it rains, the water comes straight down here into the drainage and then runs all the way down to our water butt just over here. And that allows us to keep the wildlife pond topped up and to water plants during lovely summer days like this. So here we have our composting area. It's a little bit disorganised at the moment, but we've got a plan to tackle all this green and brown waste. At Christmas time, with the Knoll Park Big Local, we ran around the local area and collected over 40 Christmas trees. And what we've done is brought them back down to the nature reserve and delimbed them and used the pines and the branches to create to place down onto the pathway. And the pines act as a natural heat suppressant, so you've got a clear walkway all the way down to the other end of the nature reserve. Yeah, so we're over at a bug motel that 4 Duke of Edinburgh students that are currently volunteering with us have put together. And what they've done is just gathered a load of broken logs and sticks and whacked them all together. I can see a few spiders in there, and we've got some midges just in over here. And yeah, we're creating little biodiverse spots throughout the nature reserve to encourage as much ecology as possible.
I think every 2 years.
So here we are at Wood Green Library. This is a joint project with Wood Green BID, the Business Improvement District, and Growing 22. And the funding was provided by the Mayor of London's Greener City Fund. And the beautiful thing about this project is not only have we created a few community gardens, but it's become a social hub of Wood Green, as you can tell by the amount of people that are still hanging around there right now. As a Haringey resident for over 40 years, I was delighted when the mall contacted Growing 22 and commissioned us to create a rooftop garden. So what we've got here is a load of different types of ferns alongside vinca and wild geraniums, and we've got a splash of colour there. And we're just above Pax, a hairdressing shop, and they provide wigs. And the idea is for some of this foliage to eventually cover the side to create a kind of fringe effect. So it's great to see this developed over the last couple of months into Wood Green's first active fernery. Welcome to Haringey's first official parklet site. This is a joint project between Haringey Council and Growing 22 and is backed by the Mayor of London's Grow Back Greener Fund. As you can see, it's a pretty big site, and today I can exclusively reveal that we've entered into RIBA architecture stage 3, which means we're in the design phase, and soon you'll be able to see some really cool designs from our architects, Ian and Tiago.
Very much, Luke. Easy to stay within the time when you've got it pre-recorded, so well done for that. Our final speaker of the evening is Carlotta from Dark Matter Labs. Unfortunately, Carlotta, I don't have a bio for you, so I'll have to ask you to introduce yourself. So over to you, please.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. All right. If you guys can see that. Great. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the great speakers. It was lovely to see all these different projects. So I'm Carlotta from Dark Matter Labs, who is a design and research agency working across very many different cities, both in Europe, in Canada, and also in Korea. And we're basically working with cities and other institutions to support them in developing climate just transition strategies, and also have them to implement. So we work with a lot of municipalities across the world. And today I'm going to be speaking about crises infrastructure, which is one of the projects that was born out of a felt necessity of supporting municipalities to find more diverse tools to be able to achieve their urban afforestation targets. And I have a background in architecture and planning. So yeah, I'm gonna have a tough last speak after this beautiful presentation. I'm sorry about that. Not as fun. But yeah, hopefully you guys can, stand around for a bit. I'll be quick. Yeah, so I think something that I've been very, very interested since kind of looking at how to help municipalities achieve their urban afforestation targets is how do we achieve these targets, but also achieve them in the way that they're just and that they can really be reached by everyone in the city, and they can provide their benefits to everyone in the same way. And it's been really lovely to see from the first speaker, really looking at all the different benefits that urban nature-based solutions provide and green infrastructure. And we really see urban forests as this kind of collision of multiple benefits. And really, this can be from companions to expert witnesses to providers. Also really great for soil quality, reducing energy usage, and so forth. So it was really great to see how everyone in their projects looks at emphasizing or seeing how to boost one of these elements. And I suppose we're not the only one looking at this in this way, but there is a wide recognition across the political landscape that there is a requirement to build more climate fit legislations, and that nature-based solutions and green infrastructure can really help to support that. And there is a recognition of a gap for the entire world to be able to achieve these tougher targets. So many very different cities across the world, we're working with Milan, with Glasgow, with Madrid, and they're all very keen on trying to work with different communities and achieve and, really shift the way what we call, from concrete jungle to actual, proper jungles that can work together with people can be achieved. However, there is, a very, very big shortfall in the funding that can enable the cities to do that. And so what is really the challenge? I think many of you underlined the shocking statistics that we were faced with in the past years that really looked at how we were all affected by COVID very differently, and then the lack of green space had a very, very bit of effect on how people were affected. And this was in the UK, but this is just not the first time that we know this. We've also seen this, for example, in the Chicago heat wave, that the lack of social and green infrastructure has played a massive, massive role in the ability of very different communities to be able to respond to a crisis. And I guess this touches on Ross's point on the resilient aspect of this webinar. So let's go back to, where trees come from. Actually, your forests and cities were never really, really there. After we started urbanizing our, villages and settings, at some point we started bringing back different species within our cities. And what you can see here in these pictures is the kind of first tree warden that was set up at the end of the 1800s. And what is fascinating about this story, and looking back at how we're now managing trees, is that it was really perceived as we had to have the proper tree. We had to understand it as this kind of beautiful lamppost, so to speak, and there was a tree warden that would take care of it. And what's interesting is, now that we look at how we manage trees in cities right now, we're still not very far off. A lot of our street trees are failing to even make it to 10 years of their lives. And this is, having a massive impact on our ability to actually, have the 5-minute walk to a park and so on and so forth. And after, very, very many research and long engagement, we have recognized that this is due to the fact that trees are accounted in municipal balance sheet as costs and not as valuable assets. And essentially what that means is that when a municipality essentially contracts out the management of their urban forests, they're very constrained by the fact that they're never able to essentially put, on the right side of the balance sheet, the fact that the trees is providing all this benefit to multiple communities, healthcare benefits, water benefits, and so forth. But they need to just account for the fact that the trees, the elderly they get, the more they cost to cut, to trim and to take care of. The root system is more difficult to manage, and it kind of gets stuck in the maze of other services and so forth. And this has been a massive issue in cities like Sheffield and other cities in the world. And this is not because they're, horrible people, the people that took care of the trees, but because it was, they were not incentivized to actually look at the fact that an elderly tree provides more benefits than a smaller tree does. And so they were incentivized to cut them down. And I'm sure that many of you know the story. And so we did some research and looked at the effect that that has, and really the fact that we don't recognize trees across their lifespan, and we don't put this in the way in which we contract for their management and the way in which we understand them when we finance our departments and so forth. It really has a massive impact on the long-term maintenance of this forest. And secondly, we tend to simplify the benefits that come out of it. So now there is a big debate around, how are we going to understand these multiple benefits and perhaps value these multiple benefits. And I think something that we really tend to say is that it's really not about putting a price tag on nature, but it's really about understanding what the provision of this, of other ecosystems, and as one of the first speakers said, as part of our nature, because we are part of them, can provide. And I think this is not just going to go a bit faster. So what do we think is the opportunity here? Is the fact that we are looking at how can we, I think as one of the second speakers was mentioning about citizen sensing, we know that there is many tools that are now available to us, and these tools can really have a massive impact on how we maintain the forest around us and how we make it thriving in the long term. And we as a team, we're a multidisciplinary team with technologists and experts of different kinds. We're looking at how can we use that to engage different communities. And we're not the only one. There's been really great projects from Jakarta looking at how you use citizen sensing to respond to flooding, all the way to just even more simpler technologies, just enabling citizens to send an email to a specific tree. And the municipality did that because they wanted to enable citizens to say when a tree was dying or needed water and so on. And citizens started to write, and all of us started to write love letters to their favorite trees and so forth. And so the real question for us is not about how do you value trees, but how do trees value you, and how can we find this kind of new relationship in the way in which we grow the forest. So this is part of the project that we're trying to develop now with the City of Glasgow, and it's called Trees as Infrastructure. And it's trying to put together many different tools from, combining satellite data with citizen sensing to be able to know the location of trees, to doing a series of engagements with different communities on the ground. And the goal is the one to be able to link up all of you guys, some of you that presented, that have individual projects that are looking for fundings, to actual people that are looking to produce an outcome. And so this is a kind of outcome-based financial platform, the one that we're building, that will be able to connect different sides of the sphere, the people that grow urban forests and the stakeholders that are actually looking to invest in outcomes and not in objects themselves. And in November, during the COP26, we will be launching what we call Carbon Plus Credit, which is essentially a credit that looking at accounting multiple benefits beyond carbon alone. And yeah, just to conclude, I think kind of throughout my experience of trying to use different tools and different always new tools to actually enable different stakeholders and different communities to actually even just start speaking the same language, to understand what benefits mean for a certain community might be might require more arts-based representation, and for maybe what a management company might require something that is more number-based and is more kind of analytically described. And so in the act of trying to combine these different communities that speak very different languages, I think our ethos is always trying to say, as we're essentially putting a lot of this information within code, within our computers, within our phones, and so on, our hope is the one not to perpetuate, the kind of pyramid where we perceive ourselves as being at the top of nature, but actually to understand ourselves as part of, bringing the commons in the loop of this technology. And yes, thanks so much for this.
Fascinating work, Carlotta. Thank you so much for that. Maybe you can put a link to your website in the chat so people can have a look at those projects, if there's any information there. I will bring us over to Q&A. We've got about 5 minutes. I appreciate people have been here for a long time, so it's if you need to log off at 8, that's no problem, but we'll try to answer a few burning questions before then. For Adib on the Miyawaki forests, there's a question. Once the forests are planted, who is responsible for looking after them?
So different cases. At the moment, with our pilot project on the Beirut River, we are the ones managing this forest. So we do this with my team, and we do a call for volunteers twice a month. So twice a month we have a maintenance session. The municipality is taking care of the watering. So we start with a daily watering regimen, and we slowly space it out to once a week, once a month, until after 2.5 years, we eventually stop watering. So it's a joint effort, but it's a case by case, depending on the agreement we reach with the municipality or the client.
Yeah, excellent. And I think getting volunteers involved, it's obviously, do you want to help look after trees? It's not a hard sell. There's many people who want to get involved, I'm sure. It's actually a great way to get people to kind of adopt these spaces and take care of them for these 2 years. So where they're at a critical stage, it creates a lot of attachment and bonding with nature. Sorry, there is a question in here. Somebody says that they're frustrated by planning permission being given for new developments that have very little greening or very poor quality greening. And the question is, how can councils and planners be persuaded to do better and to not create, they said, health/air inequality slums of the future? As someone who works in the industry, I can absolutely empathize with the frustration. What I would say is that there's a couple of things coming into force which make me optimistic, 2 of which Niall mentioned, which is the requirement for net biodiversity gain. The other thing in London is the Niall, you probably know the word.
Urban greening factor.
There you go, the urban greening factor. And also last year there was a consultation about basically recreating the planning system of England to work better and to be more fit for purpose. And that gives me a bit of hope that in the future we will start to deliver these things better. But perhaps some of the Niall or Carlotta or somebody has another comment to make on that issue.
No, well, probably just to further what you said, and I think it's long overdue. Like, biodiversity net gain will become law, and it's when a developer must leave the site in a minimum 10% better off than once they found it. Now, up until this point, there was no onus on the developer to have any green infrastructure, any benefits to the built environment. So when this actually passes and becomes law, I think we'll see a radical change in the way developments are approached. And what we see already with our design and consultancy division of the business, that, okay, historically, landscaping was the last service on the site, and 90% of the time it got valued engineered out. And what was remaining was standard car park planting. We are now being brought in at early stages because they're looking at green infrastructure as the way forward. So when we submit our design consultancy packages, along with all the M&E packages, drainage packages, etc., it becomes fabric of the company, of the property itself. So we are starting to see that tide turn. But again, it's everyone out there listening today. It's the more you request this, the more it will be supplied. And that's just the bottom line. If you keep asking, why isn't it here? When is it coming? How can we have this? Everything is supply and demand. If you demand it, it will be supplied. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think there is like a big practice, with a generational shift, in a sense, in the way that architects and designers are being trained, and engineers as well. Engineers, when you were saying, yeah, as an architect, you were pushing to get a green roof on your project. They're like, yeah, fine. And then they were still putting up water tanks that were so massive and they didn't even understand it because they didn't study it, and it wasn't part of the curriculum. And so I know that this is frustrating, and it's, I think we're all in this kind of limbo a little bit, but I think curriculums are also changing, and I think it's part of also a culture and behavioral shifts as much as a regulation shift.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. A couple of people are asking if they can get in contact with London National Park City and the Rangers to see if we can get involved with projects you're working on. Yes, absolutely. Please do contact us. And I'm just leaving a link in the chat right now, which is the Get in Touch with Us page on the website. So you can go there and you can fire us an email. Other people are also asking if they can get contact details for the speakers. I believe an email will be sent out to you with those contact details, unless Florrie tells me otherwise right now. So yes, that will be incoming, and we're hoping this will spark off some more collaboration. Unless there's any more questions that pop into the Q&A here, and it's 8 p.m. now, so I think we can possibly wrap that up. Florrie, is there anything from you before we finish?
Hi everyone, thank you so much. It's been amazing to hear from all of you. Apologies again for the minor technical glitches, the joys of doing things online, but as I said, it's amazing to have had you all together. Thank you very much. We will send a follow-up email. We will upload the talks as well. Hopefully you can connect with each other as well, because the purpose of this event is also to foster action in whatever shape and form we can, either at an international level, local level, in our community, planting a carrot, whatever might be our contribution when it comes to urban greening. And just as a reminder, and Ross just shared the link as well in the chat, We're running loads of different events this week. Tomorrow we will be running a similar event with showcasing a lot of our rangers' work. So please do join. If you want to visit Rose's garden that she was talking about, on Sunday there's a free event happening there, and you will also get to draw some cool trees from the area. So thank you. Have great evenings, and let's stay connected. And if if you'd like to collaborate with us, I also left in the chat our Rangers email. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening and stay cool.